Hey guys, so today's lesson will be continuing on with some probability and statistics. Our I can or our goal is I can predict outcomes using unbiased samples. If you have not already, please go on over to assessments and complete the 420 warm-up. It should just take you a few minutes and then come on back to the video. Okay, so there's our I can for today. Today's going to be a lot of vocabulary, and the math questions are going to seem really simple because it's more you categorizing a situation instead of trying to get a numerical answer. What you're learning today and these terms will determine how well you are able to understand what we do the rest of the week. So make sure the 4 terms that we covered today that you feel confident with and that you remember them. So you might want to write them down somewhere or make sure you remember how to get back to this video on YouTube. Okay, so let's get started. Our first term is population. So you hear this term a lot. So even now with the virus, they talk about our population, the US population, China population. So the actual definition of what a population is, it's an entire group so an entire group of people or objects. So we can be talking about people, we can be talking about objects, either one. So an example of this is all of the United States. Another example could be all of the clothes in Target or all of the pens in Target. You're not excluding anyone within that entireness. Okay, so it's all of something. You're not separating it into little groups. Okay. Our next term is sample. So you have your population and then you have a sample. So sample, if we're talking population's big, sample gets smaller. So a sample is a part of the population. So let's keep it relevant. When you turn on the news, all you hear about is the virus. Well, one of the cities that they talk about a lot is New York City and how they're sampling New York City. So if our entire population is the US, to get smaller, we could talk about New York City. That would be a sample. So I'm going to write that down. NYC means New York City. Another example of this is if we're talking about all the pens in Target. Miss Brown, Mary Michael, some of my other friends, we like those pens that I have, the Frixion pens. So that we've got all the pens in Target, then we go down to the Frixion pens, which I do not have. Mine are lost, could not find them when I came to school. If you took them, I hope you enjoy them right now. Okay, so does everyone understand? Population, big idea, no one's excluded. Sample, smaller. So you've got your big population. Sample is just a piece of the population. You're leaving people out. Okay? Next thing we're going to talk about. Well, if we have samples, we've got biased and unbiased samples. And if you guys would have took your EOG this year, you would have saw a question that would have said, is this a biased or unbiased sample? And you would have to explain why. Okay? So biased and unbiased. First off, un means not. It's a prefix for not. So we are not biased. So for you to really understand that, I want to first talk about what a biased sample is. So we're going to go right here, okay? Okay, so when we're talking a biased sample, this is a sample that does not represent the larger population. And generally, it favors one part of the population. Now, after I get done writing this, we will talk about examples. So it will generally favor one part of the population. Okay, so an example of a biased sample would be if you walk into Coley Valley and you say, hey, what's your favorite school in Jackson County? They're not going to say Fairview, they're going to say Coley Valley. That's biased because you're walking into that school and asking them something that they are, their opinion's already made up of. Another example of a biased sample would be if you walked into a soccer game and you said, okay, do you like soccer or basketball better? Not all of them would say soccer necessarily, but most of them would. Let's say if you walk into a girls math class and you say, okay, what would you like for lunch today? Well, that's not fair because it's only girls choosing. What about if all of those girls like salads? What about if all those girls want cheeseburgers? That's not fair. It's not representative of the entire population. Just like you guys are seventh graders. If we went to the sixth grade group and we said, okay, sixth grade, where do you want eighth grade to go on their trip next year? That's not fair to ask sixth grade, right? That's not a representative of the entire population. If you walked into, let's say, Burger King and you asked those employees and you say, do you like Burger King or do you like McDonald's better? Some of them are going to say McDonald's, but a lot of them would say Burger King because that's where they work. So you have to make sure the people that you're asking represent the entire population. Okay, so now we're going to go back up to unbiased samples and then we'll be able to compare and contrast the two. So to be an unbiased sample, there are three things that a sample has to hit. So the first thing, the sample has to represent the larger population. So it has to represent the larger population. So that means if we are talking about our middle school and we are trying to figure out when we want the middle school dance to be, what time, that would mean that we had to look at some seventh graders and some eighth graders. We need to talk to some boys and some girls. We need to make sure that we get some people out of each homeroom. That way we're looking at the entire population. We don't want to just ask the girls who want to go get their hair done before. Then they push back the time. We have to make sure we get boys, girls, each homeroom, and make sure it's fair. We don't just go to Miss Allen's homeroom and just talk to the boys. That wouldn't represent the entire population. The next thing is that it has to be large enough. So a large enough sample. When people vote for the president, we don't just let two people vote and say, okay, those two said yes, so that's what we're going to go with. No. When they are sampling vaccines, they have to have enough people to make sure it's working correctly. They can't just give it to one person and say, okay, worked for you, we're good, we're going to give it to everybody. Whenever they are, when we are sampling for, let's say, superlatives in eighth grade for the yearbook, we don't just ask one homeroom how they feel about all of eighth grade and trying to pick those. We ask each homeroom. Okay, so it has to be large enough. If it's too small, there's no way that you can get all the unbiased opinions. The last one has to be selected at random. Okay, so my seventh graders, there's a lot of you that come in right at 8:05 or right at 7:55. So what about if we were asking where we should take the 8th grade next year. And we say, well, we're going to pick the first 15 people, 7th graders, to walk into the door. If you're late every day because your parents are a little bit later, you're not going to be happy about that because that didn't give you an option to be chose. So if we said, well, we'll choose every 6th person that goes through the door, that would give you an option to be chosen because we're counting off by 6s. We're not just saying, okay, the early birds get it. Or saying, okay, we'll take the last 5 people that come in. Because then if you're early, you don't get chose. So the people have to be selected at random. So a lot of times, like pulling names out of a hat, doing the 3rd person in line, those are a lot of the common ones that you'll see. Okay, so there's 4 terms that we've covered: population, sample, unbiased, and biased. These are very important, especially these 2, because with what we're doing on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, you have to understand biased and unbiased to be able to understand why the things we're doing make sense. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to do 4 examples, I hope, in the amount of time, and we're going to say if they're biased or unbiased and explain. So on your homework, you're going to have to explain as well. So make sure that you do this and you understand it. So number 1, Casey surveyed the members of his soccer team to ask them what their favorite sport is. Do you think that's biased or unbiased? Well, he's asking soccer players about their favorite sport. That's not fair. So this is going to be biased because he's only talking to the soccer team. What about the football players? What about the basketball players? So that is not fair. Okay? Not good. Number 2, an airline is conducting a survey to determine whether people prefer to check their luggage or carry it on. They ask every 10th person that walks into an airport. Well, that seems pretty good to me because what they're doing is they're trying to see if you want to check their luggage or carry it on. So they need to ask the people in the airport. They're doing that. They're not restricting how big their sample is, and they're randomly doing it every 10th person. So that would be unbiased. And if you have something that's unbiased, you can just put meets the 3 criteria. Okay. Number 3, Amani would like to approximate the number of students in her school with part-time jobs. She surveys the 28 students in her math class. Think about this one. So she wants in the entire school, but she's only doing 28 students in her math class. What piece does that miss out of the 3 up there? It's biased because it's not random. It's only talking to the math students, so not random. She would have to go to each class or in the cafeteria. Okay, so it's biased because it's not random. She's only talking about her math class. That might just be the calculus kids. That's not fair. Number 4, a school district would like to know what type of communication parents prefer. They surveyed the parents of 7th grade students enrolled in the district. Again, biased because it's only the 7th grade students. It's not random. Okay, it's not random. So here's your homework. If you're at home, you're going to want to download the document or write it on a Word and save it to the flash drive so I get it next week. If you're at home with internet, you're going to do this on assessments. But what you're going to do is do all of these questions and you're going to state whether they are biased or unbiased and explain. The explanation is the important part because sometimes these are confusing or they can go one way or another. Your explanation will be more important than if you say biased or unbiased. Okay? If you have any questions, email me. Have a great night or day. This might be day if you're doing this on time.